This is The Balanced Dilemma. We tackle the often uniquely, but not always, female dilemma, managing life, work, family, and self. I'm Maura Carlin.
And I'm Christy Derrico. At The Balanced Dilemma, we speak with women and men to hear their balanced stories. Our guests are entrepreneurs, reinventors, creators, executives, parents, and partners, telling us what we really want to know. How the heck did they manage that? And can you have it all and all at the same time?
Our guest is Andrea Bartz, also known as Andy, a journalist and author of mystery thrillers such as We Were Never Here, The Spare Room, The Lost Night, The Herd, and her latest, The Last Ferry Out. As Andy shares about her writing, she's also going to tell us what we should be reading this summer. Whether on the beach, the mountains, or a plane. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I know you're really busy right now, and it's all centered around this awesome title, The Last Ferry Out, which came out May 20th. Have you been on book tours? Tell us what's going on with your new book.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been an exciting time having this book out in the world, The Last Ferry Out. And I've been doing events all over. I still have a couple coming up. And I was at Thriller Fest, which was the big festival in New York for thriller writers and fans. And it's been a lot of fun doing promotion for it because I'm really excited about this book.
Can you tell us what inspired it?
Yeah, absolutely. So The Last Ferry Out, I'll start with what the book's about, and then I'll tell you how I ended up there. But The Last Ferry Out is about a grieving young woman who travels to this remote island off of Mexico, where a few months earlier her partner died in a tragic accident. And while she's there, she falls in with this enchanting group of expats that, of course, had spent time with her partner. The more she gets to know them, though, the more she begins to suspect that maybe they're hiding some things, and perhaps that accidental death of her girlfriend didn't go down the way she thought it did. And she begins to believe that there might actually be a murderer in their midst, and she might be trapped on an island with a killer. So I had the idea for this book years and years ago. Back in February 2020, I spent a month traveling solo around Mexico. It was great timing, which I didn't know at the time because it was right before the world shut down. But I don't speak very good Spanish, and I was traveling alone. And so like you do, I was just meeting people everywhere I went. And all along the west coast of Mexico, I was meeting expats, and they were so warm and welcoming. And they brought me into the fold and introduced me to their friends who were from all over the world. And, while I was there, I was one of them. I went salsa dancing with some of them. I went to a big beach bonfire with other ones. And I was a little bit envious of these people because they all kind of parachuted out of their lives in order to live in paradise. And, maybe they were doing a little work, maybe they weren't. They were just living in this beautiful place, and they'd formed these really close-knit communities, which I thought was so interesting because if they all lived in an English-speaking country, I didn't think that these groups would have been friends. They were very motley crews. And so I thought, what would lead to somebody deciding to kind of, dive out of their own lives and leave behind the life they were born into and their friends and their family and all that to be somewhere new? And of course, because I'm a thriller writer, I thought, what are their secrets? What are they running from? What do they have to leave behind? And what would they do to sort of maintain this paradise that they have formed together? So as is sort of my way, I took this interesting, close-knit, closed-door social milieu, and I threw a dead body in the center and saw what happened.
Was there someone you met on this trip where you're like, they could be an axe murderer, or who made you suspicious, or made you
just
wonder?
An overactive imagination?
Yes.
It's a great question. And honestly, everyone was so warm and welcome. I feel like I need to make it clear that they were very, very kind people. And I don't think that any of them had, murderous pasts, but they were simultaneously so warm and welcoming, but everyone was a little bit quiet about their past. It was like they didn't want to talk about that. They wanted to talk about the present and this beautiful, life that they were living together on the beach in Mexico. And, I have a very overactive imagination, and it's my job as a thriller writer to imagine the worst. So I thought, how far would a group like this go to sort of protect their own secrets and protect this really, sun-drenched way of life that they lead?
Are you still in touch with any of them?
I'm in touch with a few just on Instagram, but really none of the characters that I put into the book are a one-to-one map of anyone I met. It was more I was inspired by this idea of an expat crew. So
Yeah, because
none
I
of the
was
main
curious.
friends.
I was curious if they said anything about
Well, they
the
probably
book.
would be
Yeah.
complimented to know they were the inspiration. And I was listening to a podcast, and another writer had a plot where it was almost like Squid Games, and you would be penalized if you told anything about your past. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Then that's really withholding, and you kind of have to imagine what the character's about. But I cannot wait to read this.
I
And
was kind of thinking Traders,
yes, Traders.
the TV show Traders.
And how did you come up with this title? Because that's a great title.
Yeah, thank you. So I originally was calling it, well, first I was just calling it Expat Island for myself, knowing that was not going to be the real title because that's not a very good title. And then when I turned it into my editors, I suggested the title something like I need to tell you something, because that's actually the last text that before she died, the main character's partner, her fiance, had sent her, and it's always kind of haunted her that she never got to find out what it was her partner wanted to say. But my editor and agent thought that was just a little like forgettable and sounds like a lot of things. And so on one long car ride with my partner, we just brainstormed dozens and dozens of possible titles that had to do with the island and the beach and the cliffs and all these different elements of it. And one of many that we put on there was The Last Ferry Out. Again, this is a remote island that, there's only a once a week ferry to and from. And if that ferry doesn't come, you're kind of stranded. And that was the one that my editor and agent really responded to.
Yeah, well, the title just evokes in your mind a story that you're thinking, what if you miss the ferry, or what if the ferry doesn't come? But
Yeah.
like so many of your books, going through my mind is a streaming show, because I could just see this turned into gorgeous people living in paradise. Tell us about your experiences with turning your material into the big screen or the small screen. Have you had any of them take that path?
So I have had all of my books before this one optioned at some point by people looking to develop them into movies or TV shows. Some of those are still in development without me being able to say too much. And the option period was up and those were returned to me. I am interested in writing for the screen, big and small. I've been working with some producers on some screenplays, and I would love to learn how to write for TV, but it's a very different beast because you're kind of creating this engine that's going to keep creating stories for season after season. So it's really fun to think about how it might translate, because I agree, I see it as a series, and I see all of these characters as having really interesting backstories and just more stuff that we could dig into in a TV show.
Yeah, a la White Lotus, and and that's
Exactly.
true of your other material. You could just see yourself being where the characters are, and you really pull us into the story. So
But you weren't
Thank you. I love
always
setting.
you weren't always creating characters because you started out as a journalist. Tell us about that and how you evolved into writing mysteries.
Yeah. So when I was a little kid, like a lot of creative little kids, I was writing stories like crazy and making little books and illustrating them. But in college, I got a journalism degree and I did an internship in New York at Condé Nast, and I just fell in love with magazine editing. And I was like, forget fiction, I want to be a magazine editor. And I did. I worked in that industry for about 8 years and I loved it. But every year that I was in it, it felt like the industry was sort of crumbling around me. And my last full-time job was with a team that I just loved working with, and I loved the magazines that we were making. And the magazine was doing well and gaining readers. And one day we came into work and just found out that we were going to be folded. Our subscription base was being added to another deal another sale of a different magazine. And we were all out of a job. And I was freelance writing in the meantime, but I thought I need to have some kind of creative project that's mine, something I care about, that I can't just come into work on a random Tuesday and find out that it's been taken away. and I love reading books. And I had some friends who had published novels as well. So I thought, you know what, I'll try my hand at writing a manuscript. And I went to work, and that first book became The Lost Night. And suddenly I didn't feel quite so inspired to go back to a full-time job. So for a while, I was writing books and I was freelance writing and I was doing travel writing, which was, of course, a lot of fun. But now The Last Ferry Out is my fifth book, and now I'm pretty much exclusively writing books. So that was sort of a journey since my first book came out back in 2019.
Well, you've really nailed it because you've really positioned yourself as an expert on. You're on Substack. Your social media is on fire. I know you work really hard at it, but the product looks top notch. And we take cues from all the stuff you do to promote yourself because that's part of being a writer these days. Which, from what I hear, when you get the book deal, a lot of authors might think, "Oh, this is it. My publisher's going to take care of me," and that is not the case. So tell us about how you made yourself such an authority in that arena.
Yeah, well, I realized that I had sort of a unique background because, as I said, I was a magazine editor, and specifically, I worked in what we call women's service, right? Like, Glamour and Self and these magazines where it was all service writing. It was all helping the reader to do something with really actionable advice, with how-tos, with useful information that you can act on. So I had a whole training in that. And then I, became a full-time author and pretty quickly realized that there was a lot of awful advice out there. Like the stuff, especially right now on Threads. I don't know why, but Threads is just like a bastion of bad publishing advice. And I, really love mentoring people, and I love working with other writers on their writing. When I was in magazines, I loved, being a supervisor and sitting down and looking at an article with a junior editor. So I thought, like, why don't I kind of marry these skills I have with this need that I'm seeing and provide, authoritative advice on craft, on writing a great book, on how to sell it, how to get an agent, how to market your book, how to market yourself and build your own brand, the sort of insider understanding that I'm gaining of the publishing industry from an author's perspective. And so I'm sharing a lot of that on social media, and I quickly realized like there was a hunger for it, and people really responded to that when I made reels and TikToks and things, sharing that kind of advice. And so about a year and a half ago, I launched my Substack, Get It Right, WRITE, get it. And that is sharing all of those things, that advice, that community, that publishing intel, really honest sort of essays and reports from the trenches of author life, which, I think can maybe sometimes sound demoralizing because it's not as, like you said, you don't just get that deal and everything is romantic and beautiful. And likewise, you don't just, become a bestseller and then have the rest of your career just totally taken care of and simple and easy. Like it's not smooth sailing after anything. It has to be something that you love doing. And so I talk about when it's going really well, and I talk about when it's going not so well and when things are hard. And I've just found that there's not a ton of other authors really being that kind of candid about author life. And so people
Right.
seem to really appreciate that.
There's a handful of you. You're like in a little clique, a great girl clique of Courtney Mom, Lee Stein. There's a few of them. Gillespie, I think, isn't it? Karen. I love reading their articles. They're very well written, and it's nice to support female writers that are doing a lot in that space and doing and becoming successful because it's a tough area.
Do you find people want to hear about, I guess you'd call it blank page syndrome and imposter syndrome related to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of, I get the question about, blank page syndrome or, writer's block all the time. And it's almost like I don't understand the question because like, writing isn't something that you do only when you're inspired. For me, it's my job, it's a habit, it's a muscle that I work on daily. And so it's like, even if it's really bad, I still have to sit down and write something. And often if you sit down and force yourself to write something bad, something better will start to come out of your fingertips. So I do find that, people sort of have this block of getting way too wrapped up in Is it going to be good enough? Am I writing, is this story going in the wrong direction? What if I don't sell it? What if I can't get an agent? What if I do sell it and the book doesn't do well? And like, none of that matters. That's sort of like, preemptive imposter syndrome. And my advice is always like, go back to what you can control. And what you can control right now is what's on the page, what you are actually writing.
And is the plot set out beforehand, like, or does it develop?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the industry, we often say, "Are you a plotter or a pantser?" Which I think pantser is a terrible term, but right by the seat of your pants is the idea. And I am a pantser. I wish I could be an outliner. I wish I could figure out the entire story beforehand, but I really can't. I need to figure it out by writing. So for me, I start with kind of a premise. I start with a hook, and then I begin writing to develop it and to figure out where the story is going. And on my worst days, that's miserable. And I'm, feeling like I'm never going to land the planes. And I'm staring at the ceiling at night thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to, turn my advance back in and this is going to fail. But on my best days, that means that I get to experience the surprises and the reveals and the twists almost as a reader, because they kind of occur to me right before I write them. And it's like, oh my gosh, of course, I didn't realize I set that all up beforehand. Amazing. And that is just the best feeling in the world. I feel like writers are just living for that moment.
We had another guest who talked about that. She said, I was writing the story this way, and all of a sudden the mother showed up.
Right.
Yeah, but surprised. Characters surprise you more often than you would think.
Exactly. This character popped up and needed to be heard. So I'm just curious, with your craft, how many days a week do you write? What time of day? Do you,
how long?
Do you strive for a certain word count?
Yeah, so it depends where I am in, like what mode I'm in. But when I'm in writing mode, I generally have a daily word count goal that I have figured out mathematically how many words a day I need to write in order to stay on track to have a draft when I need it, when I need a completed draft. And it depends on the project, but that's usually somewhere between like 500 and 800 words. And then I also I have a goal on weekends too, but it's less. And it's actually a little easier to be productive on weekends sometimes because I'm not getting like emails or other distracting stuff. And so I wake up and I try to do my writing time relatively quickly to get it out of the way and not get too distracted. And I use the Pomodoro method. So I'll do 20 minutes of writing, even if some of that is just me free writing and being like, I don't know what happens in this scene. I don't know what the mom is doing here. I don't, this is terrible. And this stinks and is never going to work. But there's something about moving your fingers again,
that's really encouraging.
I hadn't heard that term.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Pomodoro method.
And then I can move back to the manuscript.
It's used for studying also in education.
I do remember that. Yeah. I guess I wasn't as good at that as you.
If you force yourself you don't need to wait for inspiration. You can start doing it and then the inspiration will kick in, like anywhere in that cycle.
And are you ever in a place where inspiration strikes you more? I'll just give you an example. When I'm walking my dog, I like to go in the woods. And sometimes when I'm there and it's super quiet, things come to me. Do you ever have that?
Yeah, definitely going for walks is a big one, just physically moving. And similarly, like if I'm on vacation and somewhere totally new, I feel like that's just sort of creating all these different synapses and input, and like being somewhere I've never been before can kind of lead to inspiration. But closer to home, I too find that if I go in the woods, especially, I'm up in the Catskills right now, and when I go in the woods, there is something that makes me feel like I'm a little kid playing in the woods, which is one of my favorite things to do when I was small. And that just sort of unlocks a part of my imagination, and I can come up with things.
Well, now I want to get to the good part.
Yes, we're going to flip the tables.
Yeah, I took a picture that I was going to text around for today, but I'll do it after the show. And that's all the books on my bedside table, which my bedside table is never nice. I have to set it up for a photo op. Mora's looks much more, what's the word?
Curated.
Curated, that's the word. What is on your bedside table to read this summer, or what have you read that you'd like to tell us about? I see you told me Darkly by Marisha Pessl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Marisha Pessl, who I just had the honor of meeting at Thriller Fest, which was incredible. I brought my own copy of Night Film, one of her earlier books that I love, and got all tongue-tied and totally fangirled, but she was so gracious and lovely. Um, but yes, Marisha writes both young adult and adult novels, kind of thrillers. And Darkly is this fascinating YA story about a teenage girl who enters this competition to sort of obtain, basically to work her way into the, how to put this, actually. I haven't had to put it into words. And her whole thing is that her stories are very complex and therefore so engaging. So basically, Darkly is this brand that makes board games that are immersive and that are complicated, and that take a lot of thinking and that are eerie in different ways, some that you play at night.
Like
and
a Ouija board or something?
Not a Ouija board. They are like board games. They are sort of like puzzle games, games of logic. You're trying to figure them out. But they have this cult following in this world of Darkly. Like, people are obsessed with them. There's a whole cult of personality around them. And the founder herself, has passed away, and there's talk of, is there this game that, there's rumors of sort of an unreleased game. And our young character, along with some other teenagers, gets selected to a very secretive sort of like internship over the summer, to learn about the Darkly factory and be on the grounds and learn how they're made. But once they all arrive there, they learn that they're there for a very different purpose. And so I will say no more, but it is sort of a puzzle box of a thriller, and it has lots of twists and turns, and it's very intricate, like an incredible and beautiful board game, and I highly recommend it.
Okay, that's a good one. So would you like to go? Or
yes, you've also, recommended The Guilt Pill.
Oh, we both recommended it.
Somya, Dave?
Yes, by Somya. So this one is really cool and kind of a genre blender. It's kind of speculative fiction. It's a little bit thrillery, but it's about a woman, a mother, who feels very, overextended at work and at life and everything. And she agrees to start taking a pill, an experimental pill that basically eliminates the feeling of guilt. So she no longer has to experience guilt when she's on this. And it's just such a killer hook and so interesting. And like, Somya herself is both an author and a mother and a psychiatrist. She's an MD, and she's a TV personality. She does all of these different things. And so it really like shines through how she creates this fictional pill and what it's doing in the brain, but then also how this woman's life is affected by it, and sort of, it's just sparks a really interesting discussion of like what would happen if there were a pill and moms could just take it and not feel guilt.
Sounds like some other pills that we've had floating around. So I'm just going to tell you a book that I recently read that I loved, Cloud Cuckoo Land, and it's by Anthony Doerr. And it was long. It was like almost over 500 pages, which I don't know about anyone else in this conversation who has this feeling, but I definitely have a shorter attention span these days. But he wrote so engagingly, and I noticed another thing that he did. The chapters got shorter as the book went on, and it made them more page-turning. But it's multiple POV, and it starts in the future, goes to the past, goes to a more present time. So you're just bouncing all over the place, and all you're thinking is, how are these plot lines connected?
Were you able to follow that?
Yes, I was. And I have read, he wrote All the Light We Cannot See.
Oh, okay, yes.
Which is completely different than this book. And I do know from a friend that her son was assigned this book as a school read over the summer. And I need to tell her, this is going to be a tough read for these kids. This is not an easy book. But regardless, I loved it. And I can't say that I feel that way all the time. There's so many books that we start. We're members of a non-reading book club. We constantly assign books and don't read them, or one of us doesn't read. I'm probably the biggest repeat offender.
I don't know about that, but we don't discuss them as much as we should.
No, we get onto other things. But eventually I'll get to some of them. So have you read one recently? Or
I have. I just read, but it was not a novel. I just read Ina Garten's memoir.
Oh.
And I have to say, I loved it. And there's a section of it that hits on a lot of the issues we discussed, Christy, because there was a time where she almost, well, she did separate from her husband, and it had to do with balance issues and mental load.
Right.
And I found that interesting. But, it's called something like Be Ready When the Magic Happens.
Right.
And so much of what she did wasn't so much planned as taking advantage of opportunities, or thinking ahead or being open to it. And I just loved, I loved that.
Well, I copied her Hampton's house, the way she had the hydrangeas planted around it, and that's how my house is. And different years get more or less hydrangeas, depending on how much attention they get with water and seasons. But you have another one? You want me to go?
Go right ahead. I have lots of them.
Okay. So I loved The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I love speculative fiction.
Why don't you explain to listeners who may not know what speculative fiction is?
All right,
and give
Andy's
some
more
examples.
of an authority. Tell me how best to describe speculative fiction.
Oh my gosh, put on the spot. Well, I don't write it myself either, so I feel like somebody who's really an authority is going to be like, not quite. But the way that I think of speculative fiction is that it's like our world, but like with one thing being different or just slightly in the future. So it's not like sci-fi fantasy where it's like Star Wars in a totally different world. It's like quite similar to our world, but something has changed. So for example, like The Power was a big one where it was set in our world, except that women had developed an ability to hurt people with their hands just by touching them. Often dystopian fiction that's just slightly in the future. It could be classified as speculative fiction because again, it's related to our world, but it's just like a little different.
Well, then I could be completely wrong if this is characterized as speculative, but it's magical. That's the way I would describe it. And it has this circus that pops up, and again, multiple POVs, different timelines. And that one was interesting because the two timelines came together. One, I guess, was in the future and one was in the past, and she had this way of converging them, and I thought it was fabulous. It was a really good book, and in different places also. Part of it was in the United States, part of it was in London. I really enjoyed that book. She did a great job.
Andy, you like Tell Them You Lied by Laura Loeffler. Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, so that is one that came out fairly recently, shortly after my book. It's a debut. And it's very suspenseful, though not quite a thriller. And it is about these two best friends who are sort of frenemies who met in art school. And so there's dual timelines where you're seeing them like become friends in art school and sort of tussle in the way that like a very complex friendship, people in a complex friendship can. And there's sort of power plays and there's kind of obsession. But then the other timeline is in the present, and it's actually set with the backdrop of 9/11. So they're in New York City. It's a few years later. They're young women living together in New York City. And we discover that pretty quickly that our narrator has sort of hired somebody in a sort of half-baked idea, has hired somebody to threaten that friend with a knife for reasons that we later understand, not to hurt her, but to teach her a lesson. Only 9/11 happened, and so she can't get a hold of her. And so it's just a really interesting exploration of identity, obsession. There's a lot of that like bad art friend energy with that idea of sort of creation and who owns an idea and an aesthetic. They're working in galleries in New York City in the 2000s, and so it's sort of immersive and this like really interesting like little world that I didn't know about. And it's just a real page turner, although it's not a traditional thriller. So I really enjoyed it. It's very feminist, and it's one that I've been recommending.
You also have a book that you gave us on the list, and I was interested by the author's name, The Last Session by Julia Bartz. Related to you?
Yeah, familiar last name, right? Yes. So that one is by my sister. My older sister, Julia, is also an author. She's also
amazing.
A thriller author, in fact. And her debut was called The Writing Retreat, and that was a New York Times bestselling debut that came out back in 2023. But her new one, The Last Session, which came out in April of this year, um, is about a woman who she's a social worker. She works in a mental health facility, and becomes kind of obsessed with a patient who comes in who's catatonic and can't really tell them anything. Then that patient is whisked away, and this social worker discovers that she's been seen again at this retreat center that's in the desert of New Mexico, that's run by this really charismatic couple, where they essentially promise you that if you come for a weekend long retreat at this center, you will unlock whatever is holding you back from love, so that you can open yourself to a forever romantic partnership, which is interesting for a few reasons to our sleuthing narrator. And so she travels out and discovers that this remote kind of compound is not quite what it seems. There's some culty vibes. There's some interesting things going on with the people who are there and the people running it. So it's very dark. It's very dark. It's very twisty. It's pretty bonkers. My sister's books, I think, are way more bananas than a lot of what you find in the thriller genre. And I loved it for that reason.
It's funny that you both ended up writing thriller stuff. Like, was there something in your childhood or the water that gave you these imaginations or reality?
I think we're both, very kind of quiet and observant. Well, I guess quiet's not right, but we were very observant, certainly as children. And we grew up in the Midwest. We're from the Milwaukee area. And we were having big feelings is not very celebrated there, right? Like, it's a very stiff upper lip. We were in a stiff upper lipped family. We were in a stiff upper lipped community. We both grew up in like a very conservative Christian community with a lot of obsession with fire and brimstone and sin, and kind of keeping things tamped down. And so I think as we got older, my sister actually is a social worker herself, in addition to an author. And I, studied psychology in college and worked at Psychology Today. I think we both became really interested in all those emotions and all the sides of the human psyche that we maybe weren't allowed to or weren't encouraged to explore, like, rage and shame and fear and sort of leaning into all those things. So I think we have that in common, and it comes out in different ways in our.
Well, it's wonderful. You've both done so well and they're distinct. I mean, even though you're in the similar genre, they're distinct material, but complementary.
Yeah, I think if you like one, you'll probably like the other.
I loved The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Loved that book. And time travel, again, some type of magical element. I thought that was a great book and highly recommended. I'm not giving a very good summary beyond that, but they can Google it and see. It's got romance, and I loved it. That was a good book.
I happen to be more grounded in here and now or historical stories rather than thriller stuff. But I've really liked a lot of the books from authors we've connected with. I like The Stolen Queen by Fiona Davis, but also, and I know you know these people, Andy, The Trade-Off by Samantha Green Woodruff, which I thought was a very interesting story, taking us back, I think, to the 30s and dealing again with things about women. The same thing was true about The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern by Linda Cohn Leugman. But I also read, and I love this again, nonfiction, When Women Ran Fifth Avenue by Julie Sato. I don't know if you've read that, either of you, but it was the way she wove that story together. And we forget that, the whole department store thing was a women's world.
Right. Which is like Lynn Green, one of our guests. She was fantastic from the cosmetic world.
Right.
Estee Lauder. But you may have known her at Condé Nast, but we're name dropping. You got to check out her episode. So we have tons of books to read this summer. And whether you're in the mountains, on the beach, or sitting in your bed with the air conditioning on.
Exactly.
I'm so glad we got to catch up, and I really wish you so much luck with your new book.
The Last Ferry Out.
I was going to say, tell us the title again and where people can buy it and your website and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is called The Last Ferry Out. Again, that's Ferry. Sometimes people think of ferry in a different way. It's available anywhere books are sold. As always, purchasing it from your local independent bookstore is kind of the way you can help an author the most, but it's available on audiobook, ebook, and hardcover all over the place. You can find me on social media at Andy Bartz. That's ANDIBARTZ on Instagram and Threads. That's also my Substack that I was referring to, the newsletter of kind of writing information and advice. It's andybartz.substack.com. And finally, my website that just sort of compiles everything into one spot is andreabartz.com.
Well,
Wonderful.
This has been great, and we look forward to doing things in person, which we always want to do with you. When this comes out in paperback, we're going to do an event, and you can put it on your social media pages. But thank you, Andy, for joining us. Have a great
Thank
summer.
you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Please follow us, listen to us, and rate us on our platforms, Spotify, Apple, and our website, thebalanceddilemma.com, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter and email us your suggestions. There's no cost, but it means a lot to us.